Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is Know Before You Go, Madagascar Wildlife Adventure. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab expedition leader, Matt Meyer. Matt, thank you so much for being here today. I understand you just got back from Madagascar, so I cannot wait to hear all of your fresh information and excitement. Let's dive in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sunny. And thanks to all of you for tuning in today or tonight, where I am in South Africa. As Sunny just let you know, I got back yesterday morning from Madagascar. We were out there for about a week, just doing some pre-season scouting and doing a little bit of guide training. We had a couple of new guide faces joining us as new local guides, and then some old faces or familiar faces for some of the team, stepping into the role of expedition leader now, which is awesome, phenomenal. One of our core ideologies or part of our ethos at NatHab is the empowerment of local communities, and so it's one step ahead or one step forward in that direction, and so really excited about that. But John, if you see me doing this, I'm just relieving a little bit of pressure. Did something to my back a couple of weeks ago, so all's good though, and ready to kick it off. So Madagascar, one of my favorite places in all of Africa, the guide, or all of the world, and it's mainly for these guys, the lemurs, but obviously so much more depth to that country than just lemurs themselves, but they're a big draw card for a lot of people. So first and foremost, again, thanks for joining us, and on behalf of NatHab and the WWF, thank you for joining us today. And this year marks our 20-year partnership with the WWF, so great milestone and a great time to be going back to Madagascar. This is the first season that we're going to be running trips through there as of after 2019. So I ran one of the last trips to Madagascar in 2019, was November 2019, and then in March 2020, as we know, the world changed, and so we are back to running trips there. We've been scouting. I was there last year. I was again back there now in the last week, and everything is up and ready. We were just waiting for those flights to get more regular from South Africa, and so everyone's keen and eager and ready to get going. So this is me. These are all photos from Madagascar, and a lot of you that have tuned in today might have seen me on some of these webinars, but for those that haven't, that's me. Matt, born and raised in South Africa, and live here with my wife and 2-year-old little girl, and I guide most of East Africa and Southern Africa and Madagascar, and as of the last year, Australia as well. So a nice diverse portfolio and a lot of different places and a lot of fun. So where are we looking at here? So Madagascar, fourth biggest island in the world after Greenland, Borneo, and Papua New Guinea, off the east coast of East Africa, and we're going to dive straight into basically how this trip is, and I'm going to try and leave a little bit more time than I do usually leave the 2-minute Q&A that I swear not to leave every time, but if I do, I apologize if I run out of time. So this is a brief overview of Madagascar. If you can imagine, Madagascar is sort of my hand here. We spend time on the eastern spine, which is a mountain range on the east coast. Then we go down to the far southwest, and then we go up to the northwest. So 5 different park locations, 4 different accommodation locations if you don't include the start at Tana. But we start in Antananarivo, nicknamed Tana, by the locals. We then head eastwards into the mountains to the Mantadia, or the Andesivo Mantadia park network, and we spent 3 nights there. Then we go back to Tana, fly down to a town called Fianarantsoa, where we then head into a national park network called Ranamafana. We're there for 2 nights, and then from Ranamafana we head down into the southwest, where we spend 3 nights outside a little town called Yahusi in the Isalu massive park network where we go to Isalu National Park, and then also Zombitsi National Park. And then from there, we head back up to Tana, where we fly from Isalu up to Tana, and then head to our last location, Anjajavi, which is a beautiful beachside resort right on the beach in a little alcove. And that is on a private reserve that is also, or not founded, but also supported and sponsored by the WWF. And they've got about a 2,000 acre private reserve that is managed by Anjajavi. And then they've got about another 10,000 acre on the periphery of that, which is helped managed by the local Malagasy national parks, as well as the WWF. So that gives you a brief overview of the trip. 13 nights total, 1 night in Tana, 3 nights Mantadia, 2 nights down in Ranamafana, 3 nights in Shalu, and then 3 nights Anjajavi. And I don't know, about 12 nights, there we go. And so everyone thinks Madagascar, this is what clicks into 99% of people's brains, and they're not far off. These two creatures, one of them we're all too familiar with, and we're almost guaranteed to see on a trip. The other one, not so much. King Julian is a ringtail lemur, and we see those at 2 of our locations. His little sidekick, who I always forget his name, he's an eye, and I've seen one in 21 trips. They're very rare. They were persecuted by the local people. They're seen as bad luck. It's just not an animal that we get to encounter very often in the regions that we go to. But at Anjajavi, they do have a rehabilitation and a reintroduction program. So that is something that we possibly have the chance to interact with, but it's not always guaranteed. So moving on to what the actual reality of Madagascar is, it's a lot of this. So there's that characteristic and very distinct ringtail lemur up in the top left, followed by a beautiful sunset at Anjajavi, and then a giant female parsons chameleon in the Arboretum in Ranamafana, and then what Madagascar is often known for, the rolling green hills and rice paddies, and then a lot of smiling, happy, phenomenal, beautiful local people. The wildlife is what attracted me to Madagascar initially, but the people are what made it that much easier to go back time and time again. I started guiding for NatHab in 2017, and I ran my first trip to Madagascar in 2017. And since then, I've done about 20 trips to the big island, and every time is different. Every time is new. Every time is phenomenal and a lot of fun. So this is a little bit more of a holistic look at what Madagascar and what we can expect in Madagascar. And then just a little bit of context on the country and what you can see driving around. We've got a population of about 28 million or so on the island, and unfortunately, it is not an accolade that everyone is proud of, but Madagascar is somewhere in the top 10 poorest countries in the world. So extremely poverty stricken. Like a major highway is a very potholed 2-lane road. What a lot of North America would call a road. So in terms of drive times and things, a few 100 kilometers can take several hours to do. But it's always in the safest and best possible conditions and in the best vehicles at our disposal. And then just in terms of the people, everyone's always smiling, everyone's always happy, and they make do with everything that they have and the best of their abilities. But it is a very poor country, and a lot of people get around on foot. So it's not uncommon to be driving on the road, a truck driving past you, and there are 15 people walking in either direction. And it feels like it's overwhelming at the time, but that's how things run in Madagascar, and everyone is okay with it. We do the best of what we can to help where we can, and resources are limited in certain times. But just by coming on a trip like this, and one of our, again, another core ideology that we're going to revert back to is that conservation through exploration. So just by coming, you are helping conserve areas, you are helping empower local people, and you are helping the problem of extreme poverty in a country that otherwise, without tourism, that's one more revenue generator that's removed. And that's one of the great things about this year, is that we're pioneering that step again. So we're going back to a country that's been almost empty of tourists for the last 4 years. Everything's been going on and everything's continued ticking on. And there's some awesome new projects that we're going to be visiting this year that we weren't able to in the past. They're great new research projects that are going on in conservation in specific species that we're interested in. And so it's a great time to be going back. But this is just an overlook of what to expect on the roads. They're cattle called zebu. They are ubiquitous across the country, more so in the south than in the north and the northeast. And they use them for rice paddies, they use them for transportation, and then they finally use them for consumption. Rice is grown across the country, some places 2 crops a year, some places 1 crop a year. And a statistic that is overwhelming, or was overwhelming to me, at least initially, was that the average Malagasy consumes about 110 kgs of rice a year, one person. That's 240 pounds of rice for one person. That's a cup of rice at every single meal, 365 days a year. I like rice, but I mean, they love rice. And then I like this sort of to show 2 very different species that look very similar. Lemurs, one of the most diverse, or the most diverse group of primates that are left intact in the world, with about just over 110 species. I think the exact number is 112, 113 species of extant lemurs that remain. We've got my favorite on the left-hand side, the common brown lemur. Nothing common about this guy, just by the fact that he's found across the whole island. I love them. Their character is amazing. They sound like little piglets when they walk around. They're just so much fun, and they're always cute, and they always look like they've got a surprise look in their face. But you'll see that across all lemurs. And that's because lemurs, unlike other primates, they've got fixed position eyes. Their eyes don't actually oscillate in their eye sockets. So they're always bright-eyed or big-eyed, and when they want to focus on something, they have to move their whole head. They can't move their eyes in their eye socket. So that's why they always have that like surprise look on their face. But then the next guy right next to him, that's a Zombitsi sportive lemur, and they're only found in this very, very isolated park where we go to in the south called Zombitsi National Park. But these 2 look very similar, but they could not be more different. The common brown lemur, gregarious, lives across the whole island, is diurnal, and they're not shy, they're not secretive. They're little bandits. They'll come. It's kind of like a baboon on the mainland. They'll try and dig in things to get food, and they're so sweet. So you don't get upset if they come and steal something from you. But then the sportive lemur, solitary, nocturnal, and extremely shy. And so 2 species that phenotypically, to the untrained, or not the untrained, but to most people's eyes, they look very similar. They're brown, they're fuzzy, they're in a tree, but they could not be more different. And so that's one of the most amazing things about Madagascar, is that diversity across the island. I think of 112 species of one group of animals and a piece of, I don't know, a stretch of land, the length of California. Just that in alone is mind-boggling. So on our trip, we usually encounter sort of between 12 and 24 different species, ranging from the common brown, which is common across most of the island, to some of the more infrequently seen ones like the sportive lemurs. But this species is the star attraction in our first set of national parks, or first set of parks, the Andesiva Manta Deer Park Network, and we go to a private reserve called Analamazaltra, and this is a lemur species called the Indri. Now, this is the largest living lemur. If you can imagine from the bottom of this one's backside where it's sitting to the top of its head, it's about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. They've never been able to successfully breed them in captivity because they have such a varied diet. This lemur in particular can eat several dozen, up to sort of 60, 70 different, or from 60 or 70 different trees or plant species a day. So that's fruits, that's leaves, that's buds, that's anything off of a tree, and they very rarely come onto the ground. So they're almost a completely arboreal species, and these are this is the flagship species that we look for in our first set of parks, and the biggest lemur on the island. You can see on the far right-hand slide there, that one with its mouth open. They've also got a really beautiful but a very eerie call that they make in the morning, and it's a territorial call between the family units, often initiated by the female, and it sounds like if you can imagine what a whale through a loudspeaker would sound like. I can't make the sound because my little girl's sleeping in the next room, but it's really loud and this sort of resonating, sort of very eerie. Google it or listen to it when you come on the trip, and there's this cacophony of these through the forest in the morning, and that's the easiest way and the best way to locate them. And so the Indri, all the way down to the mouse lemur. So this is a Goodman's mouse lemur seen on a night walk at the Voima Community Reserve, which is a small community reserve adjacent to the national park, and that we'll visit at night on one of the first 3 nights. So all of our day walks are typically conducted in national parks or private reserves, and our night walks are either conducted along the edges of the roads adjacent to the national parks or within private community-run parks. And that's because historically they used to allow night walks in the park, but the illegal wildlife trade of especially chameleons and geckos, they were noticing huge numbers of them dropping in the national park, so they stopped that some 20 odd years ago. So we now utilize community parks, which is a brilliant resource for us, but also for the communities, because these were sort of fringe areas on the national parks that weren't incorporated into national parks, that were either going to be slashed down and burned and used for agriculture, or these communities have found a more sustainable long-term solution to a problem by setting up these reserves and thus expanding the footprint of that conserved area. So this is a Goodman's mouse lemur, small little guy about this big. So you can imagine a giant Indri about this big, and you got a Goodman's mouse lemur that's like maybe weighs about 2, or not even, about 1.5 ounces. So huge diversity. Also, Indri eats plants and a big diet. A lot of mouse lemurs are insectivores or nectivores, so they eat the gum or the tree sap from some of the trees. Very few of them can eat a high plant content because they need a high sugar and carbohydrate load and fat load to be able to be quick and to run like maniacs. And then we've got a pretty. This is one of the larger groups of lemurs, and these are the Sifakas, and we have the potential to see 4 different species of the Sifakas. So ranging in color, not really ranging in size, but certainly ranging in color. The one on the far right is the Diadine Sifaka, and we have a chance to see that in manta deer, and then in the middle is the Sifaka, which we see in the south down in Shalu, and then the Milne Edwards, which is the largest but also the darkest of the Sifakas that we can see in Ranamafana. And so just a diverse, and there's one other one to see up at Anjajavi, but also very white and similar to that, the middle one. So the cockerel and the Sifaka look very similar, and then the other two, one black, one white. And these are the dancing lemurs. So these are the ones that are famously seen jumping down from the trees onto the ground. And when they jump on the ground, they jump side to side as if they're dancing. And then obviously the most well-known lemur of them all, the ringtail lemur. We have a chance to see these guys at two of the reserves or two of the parks that we visit. One is a community-run park called Anja, which is on our scenic drive from Ranamafana down to Isalu, and it's about the halfway point, and it's a little community reserve of maybe 50 acres or a little bit less than 50 acres, where about 20 or 30 individuals, community individuals, decided to conserve this spits of forest around a granite rocky outcrop. And there were maybe 50 or so lemurs that were living in there. And that population has grown tenfold to about maybe 400 lemurs. And there are now 500 community members that are benefiting from tourism going in to view these lemurs. It's completely protected. All of the guides, all of the staff, everyone there is all local community members, and they've built churches, they've built schools, they've built clinics, they have a visitor center, they have a few restaurants at the entrance. So just something, this is one of the reasons why we don't fly from Ranamafana down to Ishalu, and we take the day drive, which is a beautiful scenic drive, but it is for the whole day. And it's so that we can stop here to support this local community, but then also to see these iconic Malagasy ambassadors for the first time and in their prime and in a huge number, in abundance. So a perfect project for us to support. And then also diversity of chameleons. So just again, to reiterate that these are photographs that have taken over 20 trips. So this is what could possibly be seen at any given time in Madagascar, but this isn't just from one trip. So these are two very different chameleon species living in two very different areas. You've got the Parsons chameleon on the left, seen at night, sleeping there on a tree in the arboretum in Ranamafana, and she's that beautiful sort of green, lush color, fits in perfectly in the rainforest. And then you've got the Austerlitz chameleon, which is the longest chameleon. So the Parsons is the biggest. The biggest one ever recorded weighed about 2 pounds, so about a kilo. It's like the size of a small cat. And then the Austerlitz chameleon, the biggest one I've ever seen, was from the tip of my finger to about here. So it was just over 2 feet long. And if a chameleon's tongue is 2/3 the length of their body, and this guy's tongue is out, that would be almost 3.5 foot chameleon, tongue out, tip of tail. So huge diversity in chameleons there. And then the smallest chameleon on the island is one of the stump-tailed chameleons, or a Brookesia chameleon, and it's about this big. It sits on the tip of your thumb, found at Aber Mountain up in the in the northeast. That's really isolated, a trip that would be a trip in its own. We don't go up there. We do see some stump-tailed chameleons on our trip, but most of those are about sort of that big. So still big diversity from sort of that size to the size of a cat. So you're looking at a goldfish to a cat. Pretty diverse in terms of species. And then the geckos. Madagascar, also very well known for their geckos, and in particular these two guys, the leaf-tailed geckos. So we've got the satanic leaf-tailed gecko, which is on the left-hand side, called satanic, because you've got these two little horns on the top here, and then the mossy leaf-tailed gecko on the right-hand side. Both found in rainforests. The satanic leaf-tailed gecko mimics dead black leaves in the rainforest. So in the daytime, they'll just kind of hang out there and look like 5 or 6 dead leaves on the branch of a tree. And only if they're disturbed will they move. And that's how a lot of the time how we discover them. I had a guest a couple of years ago, a young boy who was obsessed with finding one of these, and he tapped every single dead leaf that he walked past to try and find himself a satanic leaf-tailed gecko. He didn't find one, but he tried. And then the mossy leaf-tailed geckos, how they hide themselves, they're upside down on a tree, and they can mimic the lichen on the stumps and the trunks of trees. And then the fringes on the outside of their limbs and their face are actually frills that look like moss. Hence mossy leaf-tailed geckos. Both of them have a tail that looks like a leaf, but these are the two species that are our target species when looking for geckos in the rainforest. And then diversity of habitats. We've obviously got primary and secondary rainforests up in the north, the primary rainforest of the Mantadea Park network, and then the secondary and primary rainforest of Ranamafana. Both of these parks, every time I go into them, without fail, even after 20 times, in my head, all I can hear is just that starting of the Jurassic Park theme. It's just so pre-Jurassic even. I mean, some of these giant tree ferns are even from before Jurassic era. They've linked similar species to ones found in Eastern Australia, Tasmania, and Antarctica, which have proved the Gondwana theory of all the continents being sandwiched together. So just that sheer proof, Madagascar was essentially in the heart of Gondwana land when it was still a continent. And as those species split, they found fossil evidence of remnants of the same tree fern species, not these ones, but their ancestors in those areas. So most of the tree ferns that you'll find in Madagascar have relations or are related to those found in Eastern Australia, Papua New Guinea, Tasmania, India, and fossil records in Antarctica. But then this also brings me to a point of the terrain that we're expecting in these rainforests. So rainforests, they create their own weather patterns. Things can change at any moment. So rain jackets are always taken with us on these treks, even if it's sunny like that. So this photo on the left-hand side, the sun's shining, there's not a cloud in the sky. 20 minutes before that, it was raining. So that's the thing to remember about a rainforest, that they generate their own microclimates. So one part of the rainforest can be sunny, the other part can be raining. And that also then leads to a slightly muddier terrain. And we're on the eastern spine of the mountains of Madagascar. So it slopes, so it can be hilly. So certainly these first two portions of the trip are treks, they're hikes. They're not walks. We can make adjustments because we have enough guides where if there's a part of the group that are less physically capable than another part of the group, we can make an adjustment where some of the group can follow an easier trail, might not necessarily be towards the key species we're looking for. But this is the hardest part of the trip, are these first two treks. And that's why once we've gotten those out of the way, it is fairly flat and easy, even going. And down in the southwest, up in the northwest, down at Ashalu and up at Ranam and Anjajavi, it's not muddy, it's sandy bottom, not as much of a chance of rain, and it's a lot drier. So it's a lot easier terrain to walk in. But for these first two, certainly potential to be muddy, slippery, etc. So rain jacket, decent hiking shoes with a bit of ankle support, always recommended, because that is necessary when going up and over logs and walking down pathways with roots and things like that. And then diversity of habitat. So we've looked at the two rainforests, then these two here. We've got these, that Isalu Massif, that sandstone sedimentary rock down in the southwest, which was all under ocean 200 million years ago. And you can actually see those layers of sedimentation and the layers of different mineral deposits, rocky deposits. And this is taken in the morning, but in the afternoon, all of those cliffs light up just this orange, just this, you can't even imagine the different hues of orange and red and yellow that you can see on these cliffs, and how that changes as the sun goes down. And especially sort of June to November or so, when it's a little bit drier down south, not in the rainy season, you've got a bit more dust in the air, those colors are highlighted, and they are just spectacular. And then up to Anjijavi in the northwest, you've got these incredibly dramatic rocky structures called tsingy. Tsingy is the shortened expression tsingy tsingy, which means to tippy toe in Malagasy. And those are all the sort of remnant limestone base rock of coral reefs. So those are what once was also underwater when Madagascar separated, it kind of seesawed for a couple of million years. So this went from underwater to above water, underwater to above water, underwater to above water. And then after the last ice age, when there was more water in the ocean, this would have been, certain parts of these would have been underwater as well. So that's just this sort of, almost looks like a cheese grater turned upside down, of this black rock that's really, really sharp and pointy. And that's the limestone remnants of a bedrock of coral reef. And then another thing to note down south is that night sky. So really dramatic landscape underneath of those rocky outcrops, that sandstone deposit, with the beautiful Milky Way and Southern Hemisphere sky above you. This was taken facing due east. So if you were to look at the Southern Cross, and that would be sort of on this side of me here. But something to take note of at night, it's a very, very dark area, so not a lot of light pollution. So anyone that's interested in night photography, weight is sometimes a bit limiting on a lot of these trips, and because we do take private charters, we do have to sort of stick to within certain limitations. But if you do want to do some night photography, a small little tripod to attach onto the bottom of a camera, if you want to do some nighttime stuff, definitely recommended. And then some folks, or one of the questions that's always asked in terms of diversity after we've gone through lemurs, and didn't even touch on the birds, because the birds is a whole webinar on its own. But birds are incredible in Madagascar, and the diversity there is shadowed only by the lemurs. But like I said, that's a whole other webinar, and I've already run 5 minutes into your question time. So that's something that your local guide and expedition leader can cover in depth a little bit more. But baobabs and sort of the vegetation biodiversity is definitely another thing that's remarkable about this country. And we get to see baobabs down in the south in Zombitsi, and then also up again in Anjijavi. And Madagascar is home to 75% of the world's species of baobabs. 75% just sounds a bit more significant than 6 out of 8 species. Well, they're technically thinking that they're 9 now, because they've split one of the African species in 2. Well, they've split the African species in 2. So 75% of the world's baobabs are found in Madagascar. And another thing to think about, Madagascar has a higher percentage of endemism than anywhere else in the world. That includes the Amazon. So that's not saying that Madagascar has more species than Amazon, but it has a higher level of endemic species percentage-wise based on overall species. So I don't know that it's like the Amazon is a sort of in the 70s, and Madagascar is up in the 80s in terms of endemic species. So it's species found nowhere else on Earth. And this is a good example of that. The baobabs, and then an insurance broker that's going to try and sell you car insurance in 15 seconds or less. But no, this isn't the actual gecko gecko. That's the green day gecko, and we see those at Anjajavi. This is the Grenadier's day gecko, and this is seen down at Zombitsi. So briefly touching on, this is not as important as everything else in Madagascar, but it is somewhat important to mention the accommodations that we'll be staying in. So top right there is Hotel Tamboho, which is on the waterfront in Tana, about 20 minutes or so towards the outskirts of town from the airport. Beautiful. It's in a small little sort of gated area, very safe to walk around. There's a shopping center right next door where there's some ATMs for anyone that arrives early, or a local phone company if you're wanting a local SIM card, anything like that, that's right next door. And recently had a bit of a facelift, and so really nice new restaurant area, new front entrance area, and there are only about 30 rooms or so in this hotel, so it's nice and quiet as well compared to some of the bigger hotels. And we're there for the first night. That's where the welcome dinner and presentation will be. And then from there, we head to Mantadia Lodge, which is on the outskirts of Mantadia National Park, one of the closest, nicest accommodations to the national park itself, and also almost brand new, 2018, I think it was built. And they cut down an entire eucalyptus forest, which is a non-native tree species, and built this lodge out of the wood that was from that forest. So beautiful, new, and that's something to note. We don't, as any of you who've traveled with NatHab, we don't go to places for their accommodation. We go to places that have natural beauty and wildlife, and we find the best accommodation in that region. So that's one thing to bear in mind when going on this trip, is that where we stay is the best in the area. So certainly all of them are really high standard, with the exception of Ranawafana. It's slightly lower than others. It's still decent, but it's just something that's to sort of think of in advance. But we're only there for 2 nights, but it is the best in the area. And that brings me to the next set of accommodations. So in Ranawafana, just depending on our groups and numbers and availability, because there aren't that many hotels that are available in the area, we stay at one of 2. So Thermal Hotel, which is on the left, or Sitam Hotel, which is on the right. And they're just at different levels of the mountain, both within a sort of easy driving distance to the park, and both fairly comfortable. But again, we're just there for 2 nights. So all the other accommodations that are beautiful and nice, we're there for 3 nights. But here, it's a comfortable bed, it's a warm shower, it's a hot meal, it's nothing special, but it is comfortable and it is the best of what we've got. And then the stars of the show are going to be the last 2 places we stay. So Relais de Lorraine, which I'm convinced took about 400 years to build, because if you look at that, it looks like it's Photoshop, but that entire building is built out of sandstone and granite rocks from the surrounding area. So the whole lodge is built out of rock into the rock, and it is spectacular. It's one of my favorite hotels anywhere in Africa, but it is in Madagascar, so you don't have things like air conditioning in a lot of the rooms. They're very well ventilated, nice fans, breezy and cool in the night. So June, July, August, September, October, November can get a bit warm, but again, like I said, you just open the doors, put your fan on, and it's pretty comfortable. But in a more spectacular setting, I think the only one that's more spectacular is the last, and that's why we leave it for last, and that's Anjajavi. That is, the photo on the left is an iPhone photo taken at the pool on the beach, at Anjajavi on the last night of the last trip that I ran in 2019, which is just before I got married. So maybe that's why it looks more beautiful to me. But I mean, that's an iPhone that took that photo. So anything is beautiful up there. You're on the beach. All of the little rooms, the little loppers are there are 4 of them that are literally on the beach, and the rest are along a boardwalk that look onto the beach. And it's spectacular. I think it's 24 rooms, so not a huge lodge. And you can see the lagoon behind there, where we take some of the activities like the boat ride. We go sunset cruise in the mangrove swamp, and then Marumba Bay to look for the Malagasy fish eagle. But beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place to stay. And that's the last accommodation on our trip. And then just in terms of proximity to animals, so there have been a couple of pre-questions about photography. Lenses to take, obviously weight is a big thing when going on any of our trips. So versatility over abundance. So I usually, but then you also do want something that can handle low light, because certainly in the first 2 forests, it's low light conditions. So it can be dimly lit in shadows, often shooting up into trees, as you can see here. So I shoot with 100 to 400, and I found that it's more lens than what I need often. Or not more lens, but it's the perfect lens for what I need. It's got good range. It's f4 to 5.6, so you just have to fiddle a little with your ISO and be a bit creative with shutter speeds. I shoot all on manual, just for that purpose of being able to be fully in control and then pull everything out post-production if I need to. But then also the kind of terrain that we're walking in up at Anjajavi, that just shows a little bit more flat, not as rainforesty, not as muddy, not as sort of hilly. And then beautiful, beautiful big baobabs. That was actually a bird walk first thing in the morning, heading into the little baobab forest, which is wonderful. And then just a couple of conservation projects that we do get to encounter. So this is a greater bamboo lemur. They have just introduced 5 or 9 new greater bamboo lemurs into Ranamafana National Park, where there used to only be, there was 1 female left in the region where we visit. There used to be 2, but her father passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. And so now she's just got 9 new buddies to come and join her. And this is one of the projects that we'll get to learn a little bit more about and actually get some inside information and a presentation about the projects that are ongoing there at Centre Valbiu in Ranamafana National Park. So it's the greater bamboo lemur. And then some of these photos, are all taken off of trail cameras that a couple of us expedition leaders donated to Anjajavi. And this is a fossa, so the only and largest mega predator in Madagascar. And this is a project that is ongoing and continues to be going up at Anjajavi. And that's something that through working with the local vets, we get to participate in whatever activity they have that's ongoing at that time. And then just to finish it off, some beautiful ringtails from Park Anja in the south, which these, if someone say, what is your favorite thing? What is your favorite animal? Or what is your favorite place to photograph? This is kind of the top for me, either at Park Anja or Salu. They're just so emotive. They're so gregarious and they're so fun and they sound so cute. They sound like little cats. So they make this meow, meow as they're walking around. They're talking to each other. So these are just a couple of snaps to finish off before I hand back over to Sunny with 15 minutes for questions, which I've never given 15 minutes. So I've actually talked pretty quickly and about a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time tonight. So thank you, everyone. And let's see what questions we have. I'm going to leave it on the ringtails for us to look at.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Matt. we do have a bunch of questions. Some of them are going to be review, but I think it's worth just saying it again because they were asked by several different folks.
Okay.
So can you summarize the recommended footwear? Do we need mud boots, waterproof boots? What do you think is best?
How water is waterproof, because you can have a waterproof boot, but if it's raining above you, it's going to get in through your pants, your socks. And wearing rain pants, if it's pouring with rain, that's great, but then you're going to get really hot. So it's just easier to dry off after that. But I would definitely say sort of a Gore-Tex style boot that has some level of water protection. I wouldn't necessarily go gum boot because that's really uncomfortable to wear and they're really heavy. But a Gore-Tex style boot with a bit of ankle support, definitely recommended. And that can be worn throughout the trip. So even in the south, if you've got weak ankles, you can wear those and just wear them with shorts if it's too warm. But definitely something with ankle support and definitely something with a little bit of water protection.
Okay. What do you recommend? Should folks get their visas electronically or in Tana?
If you can do it electronically, I know that sometimes it's a bit of an issue with the internet and the server and all of that, and doing it online and form submission, etc. If you can get it done beforehand, great. That'll just save you 5 minutes at the airport. But if you can't, it's a simple, easy. The airport that was being built for, I don't know, the 100 years pre-COVID was finally finished during COVID, and they opened it in 2022. And it's a much bigger airport, much larger capacity, inlet capacity, and so they've got 5 or 6 visa payments kiosks, and then about 20 immigration officers that give those visas. But it's just you need to have. So when you arrive, if you arrive with the e-visa, you just go straight through to the customs official. They will give you, it's a stamp, it's a sticker about that big that they'll put in your passport, and they stamp it once, and then you have to walk all the way to the end. Just before the door, there's one kiosk that does it, and they give it a second stamp and a signature, and then you go to the person at the door and you give them your health declaration form, and that'll be a form that'll either be given on the airline or handed out as you walk into the airport. But yeah, back to the original question, if you can get the visa online, go for it. If you have trouble getting it, it's perfectly fine to get it in the airport, and it's about $35 for the 2-week visa, because they've got a 1 to 2 week visa, but usually they give us the 1 month visa, which is $35.
Okay, great. Does NatHab provide hiking poles?
Yes, we do have hiking poles with us. We carry probably half a dozen sets on either side, because we don't take them with us on the plane when we fly down. So we have half a dozen for the northern portion, and then half a dozen for the southern portion. We just don't have any at Antijavi, but that's pretty flat. And I think they've got, if they don't have walking poles, they've got umbrellas, or we can makeshift something, but it's relatively flat.
Okay,
but yes,
great.
we do have hiking poles.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about recommended immunizations or prophylactics for mosquitoes, malaria?
So since I'm not a doctor, I cannot recommend anything. I can merely say that I have not contracted malaria in Madagascar in 21 trips, being there June through November. That's usually their dry season, so mosquitoes aren't that prevalent. When we are in the rainforests, either the rooms are air conditioned so the windows don't have to be opened, or it's cold enough that there aren't mosquitoes, or it's high enough elevation that there aren't mosquitoes. If there are mosquitoes, they're mosquito nets, and there are often plugs in the rooms to plug in. But if it's 2 weeks, it's because the trade-off with an anti-malarial prophylactic is that it can give you an upset stomach. So it's probably always better to start with a prophylactic and then if you do get an upset stomach, stop, and that'll usually be within the first week. But bug spray, we also carry bug spray with us. The guides all have bug spray, and certainly the areas that we're going to, with the exception of Ranamafana, we're not staying in densely populated areas. Even when we're in Tana, we're staying in the outskirts. We're not in a densely populated area of Tana. So it's not a high risk, but there's always a risk. So for those that are more comfortable, antimalarial prophylaxis that is prescribed by a doctor, and then if it does give you an upset stomach, you can always stop it and just cover yourself in bug spray. Then in terms of inoculations, yellow fever is always a good one to have anywhere in Africa, even though it's only required north of the Zambezi River. But it's just sometimes people are more comfortable having that vaccination, but it is not a required, so far as my knowledge. I do have it, but I've never been asked for it on entry into Madagascar. But as far as my knowledge is correct, it's not a requirement going into Madagascar. And they, to be vaccinated, COVID vaccinated is not a requirement either for Madagascar.
Okay. Are there any cultural faux pas that visitors need to be aware of?
So one of the things they don't do is point at anything. Pointing is, especially in the south, pointing is a pretty rude thing to do, but they'll excuse foreigners for doing it, and they're not really overly pushy about it in a modern age. But in terms of cultural things, I'd say the one thing to bear in mind and to keep in mind is that you're not only going into a third world country where English is obviously not the first language, but it's also not a former English colony in a third world country. So English is often a third or a fourth language. So in Madagascar, it's Malagasy, their mother tongue, then French, and then English. So cultural understandings of the way they communicate and being able to communicate is a strong point, and just a little bit of patience when it comes to talking with hotel staff, local guides, even our local expedition leaders. They're very strong and competent English speakers, but they still have they're not only translating it from English into English into French into Malagasy and then back. So it's just a little bit of patience when it comes to that sort of thing. But I would say, yeah, the only thing is the pointing. That's just, no one's going to give you a hard time about it. But just if you know it before and you try not to point at things, it's just a respectful thing to do.
Hmm. And will guides offer common phrases that guests can use to communicate with the local people, or at least address them?
Yes, definitely. Sort of a hello, thank you, goodbye. It's a really complicated, or a different language to English, because it was phonetic until 200 years ago. So it's really diverse across the island. You've got 19 different ethnic groups that live on the island, and all of those have a different version of Malagasy. And then within those ethnic groups, they've got different dialects of Malagasy. So someone from the far southwest is still speaking Malagasy, but they'll even have a difficult time speaking to someone from the northeast, and vice versa. So the guides will be able to give a few phrases and things, but a general grasp of the language, I'm still struggling, and it's been a couple of trips, so they'll give a couple of words, and it's a fun language as well.
What time of year would visitors see young lemurs?
Typically September. September is when most of the lemurs have their youngsters, but it's usually timed with rain. So if the onset of if the first spring rains come in early September, it'll be earlier. Whereas if the spring rains are a bit later, it'll be towards later September. So I don't use the word guarantee, but to have the greatest chance of seeing baby lemurs, late September, early October. But then you're running into the problem of it starting to get hot. So those are the trade-offs. In June, July, and August, it's nice, cool temperatures, very little chance of rain in any of the locations. Then September, October, November, there's a greater chance of seeing youngsters, but then it's also much warmer in the south and in the west, and then there's a greater chance of rain in the east.
Does that also increase the chance of seeing leeches? Is that also a trade-off?
So rainforest leeches are this big. They're tiny. They look like inchworms, and they walk like inchworms, and they can get flicked off as easy as inchworms. I've had dozens on some treks, and I've had none on other treks. They're most active when it's actively raining. So if it's actively raining down and there's active precipitation, that's when they can be seen. For anyone that's really freaked out by leeches, leech socks are easy to come by. And all it is a thin plastic lining in your socks that can't get through your socks. But the recommendation is the same for anyone that doesn't want to get bitten by a leech. Just take your pants and tuck them into your socks. That lessens the chances of them getting into your pants and up your leg. But when I say they're tiny, they're literally an inchworm. You would have to have probably close on 1 million of them on you at the same time for you to even feel slightly lightheaded. So it's not really a worry. They don't carry any parasites. They're not going to be on you for long. Your guides will help you get them off if you're really freaked out by them. But it's a simple, easy, they're gone. But the greater the chance of the rain, the higher the chance of seeing leeches. So yes, but it's typically when it's actively raining is when they're most active.
Sounds good. Will there be an opportunity to snorkel during this trip?
Yes, at Anjajavi, we're playing ball, of course, and that's on the day we go to Marumba Bay. So that day usually starts. It's also time dependent when they can launch the boat, but it's usually between 8 and 10 in the morning. We head out. When we're out for most of the morning into lunchtime. So we head out. It's about an hour to get up to Marumba Bay. We go around the bay looking for fish eagles, looking at the tsingies, looking at the phony baobabs and that's not phony as in fake, it's phony as in a species. It's the bottleneck baobab, so it's bright red and it goes straight up and then it clips at the top into the foliage. And so we look for those on those fortunately don't move like the fish eagles do, but we look for those on the shoreline in the tsingies, and then on the way back, that's the time dependent part. The skippers and the local guides will look for the best part and the most appropriate place to go and snorkel. And they usually just anchor down there, and those that want to snorkel hop in the water for half an hour or so. But if it is clear and the tides are right and there isn't a lot of wave movement, you can get snorkel gear and you can snorkel off the beach. And there are a couple of little pieces of coral in the cove that the lodge is positioned. So yes, there is an opportunity to go snorkeling.
And just to clarify, snorkeling equipment will be provided.
Yes. However, if you do have prescription goggles, bring those along. Because some folks do have their preferred prescription goggles. They don't have those, and they don't have goggles that can accommodate glasses. So if you've got your own that have got prescription built into the goggles, or you wear glasses, I'd recommend bringing your own.
Okay.
But don't bring your own flippers because that's pretty much your weight limit. They've got flippers there.
Okay. And how cold is the water?
I have this discussion with my wife often, and I think it's an obsession with Americans. You guys are obsessed with water temperature for whatever reason. In South Africa, we have cold, cool, warm, slightly warmer, and hot. So those are our varying levels of water temperature. So whether that's 50 or 90 degrees, I don't know exactly. But the water at Anjanjavi is cool to warm. So maybe it's in the 70s somewhere, in the low 70s. It's not cold by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not bath water, but it's very comfortable. Don't need a wetsuit, don't need anything like that. I go swimming in the morning in board shorts, but I do, like, you can go for exercise swimming on the beach there. The only thing, I wear a rash vest just for sun protection, because we're closer to the equator than we are in southern Africa, and we're in northern Madagascar. So sun, even in the middle of winter, is more harsh there than it is in a lot of the United States. So if you're on a trip with me and you see me putting on a rash vest, it's just because I'm cautious about the sun, not scared of the cold. It's cool to warm water.
Sounds lovely. Thanks again. I'm going to turn it back to you for some closing comments.
Thanks, Annie. And yeah, folks, thanks so much for joining in today. Really appreciate your time and your attention. On behalf of Nat having the WWF, thank you. And for those that are joining us on trips this year, I wish you the best of luck in wildlife viewing. And thank you for being the pioneers of going back to Madagascar. I know a lot of you have, it's been a long time coming, and a lot of you booked many years ago. And I'm excited to get back out there. And yeah, excited to see maybe some of you that signed on today. I'm running a trip next month and the month after. So it'll be good fun. So thank you, everyone. And thanks, Sunny, for being a great host, as always.
It's my pleasure, and I'm just very, very envious of those who are going to be headed your way in the coming months. Thank you all for tuning in. Please join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.